Good morning and welcome to Travel Forward Online. My name is Richard Gale and I'm delighted to bring you some fantastic speakers for today's programme. But before that, here's a short introduction to today's event. The scale of disruption to global travel has put enormous pressure on existing ways of doing business. But as lockdown measures begin to relax globally, the new rules of travel are being written country by country, territory by territory, and so for the time being we're set for a continued period of uncertainty. Travel Forward Online will bring leaders and veterans together from across the spectrum to share their thinking, ideas and plans, and also for open discussion. In today's live session, we welcome Paul Charles, who will be delivering the keynote address. This is followed by the panel discussion, Paying for Travel, the customer impact during and post the COVID-19 experience. And then our industry interview with Kiara Kawara, VP for Travel at MasterCard. All today's sessions are live and we welcome questions from the audience, so please use the chat function throughout. That's it from me. I hope you enjoyed today's session and now I'll pass you over to Paul Charles for the opening keynote.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning. Welcome to all of you watching this morning as we talk through some of the issues that are certainly proving challenging to our sector at the moment, but also quite refreshing in some ways, as I'll go on to very shortly. My name is Paul Charles. I'm the CEO of the PC Agency Travel Consultancy. We represent airlines, hotels, tourism boards, cruise lines, and tour operators across the travel industry globally. And clearly, it's been a very interesting time for all of us over the last few months as we try and juggle the unknowns of coronavirus. So I'm going to take you through some of the things which we're learning, which we can apply over the next few weeks and months, but also talk about a campaign that we've been running recently called Quash Quarantine. And Quash Quarantine has been making waves for various reasons, as it certainly helped the travel sector come out of a very difficult period. Now, Quash Quarantine was actually formed by George Morgan Grenfell, the CEO of tour operator Red Savannah. And George phoned me one Saturday night towards the end of May, just after word leaked out to the Times newspaper that the government was thinking of introducing quarantine measures in the UK. And as many of you will know, quarantine kills travel. Once you introduce quarantine in some form, it puts people off traveling and it puts people off booking. Now, quarantine itself is very useful when it's used early on in a crisis or in a pandemic. Some of the wisest countries in the world, like New Zealand and Vietnam, for example, introduced quarantine measures very early on in their pandemic journey to help keep deaths low and help keep case numbers, infection case numbers low. But to introduce quarantine towards the end of a pandemic journey, as Britain was planning during June, didn't make any sense at all. And in fact, as we'll find out, it was one of the shortest government policies ever, lasting just 4 weeks. So it all began at the end of May when George Morgan Grenfell said, come on, we need to do something about this. I feel very strongly about it. I want to write a letter to the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, in the UK, and say, why quarantine was not going to work, how financially damaging it would be, how poorly thought out it would be, and how unenforceable it would be. So George started getting together initially 77 companies and individuals who felt the same way, that they wanted to endorse the letter, and in fact wanted to stress very clearly to the Home Secretary that the quarantine measures planned for June would not work. So the open letter went to media, it went to the Home Secretary, and it was very clear that we thought there would be better alternatives to quarantine. So for example, testing at airports, which is now starting to be trialled in the UK and at other airports around the world and being used at other airports around the world. Not just testing at airports, but also effective test and trace, track and trace. And the UK, for one, is starting to put in place a more effective testing regime now. These are better alternatives to quarantine because quarantine, as I say, kills travel. So we asked for the withdrawal of those plans, that the 14-day mandatory quarantine would not work, would not be sensible, and would choke off any form of recovery in the travel sector. And my word, we really did need to get recovery in the sector, certainly at the end of May. So it was endorsed by over 70 tourism and travel leaders, and there was an immediate response, I would say, from the media, which was very positive. As you can see, some of the headlines during the campaign, across television, across radio, online, and in print. And indeed, the media could see that, in fact, the quarantine measures wouldn't work in the UK. It was the wrong time to introduce them. If you were going to introduce them, you'd have done it in early March at the start of the UK pandemic journey. But to introduce them in June, when you needed recovery and to balance recovery with health measures, then it wouldn't make sense at all. So we started to build the momentum very quickly. And in fact, with the support of Travel Weekly, for example, in the trade and other trade outlets, as well as consumer media, we managed to build the interest substantially. And over 500 companies and individuals signed up from all over the world, the majority in the UK, over 400 based in the UK, signing up to endorse what Quash Quarantine was saying and doing to try and prevent quarantine measures coming in. Then we produced an opinion poll with the help of AudienceNet. They produced an opinion poll, surveyed over 2,000 adults across the UK about the quarantine measures. And you can see there some of the statistics that came out, that in fact, only 9% of the UK population believed the economy would be unaffected. So the majority felt the economy would be affected by these quarantine measures. 36% believe that quarantine would lead to many, many job losses in the sector. And in fact, 85% lacked confidence in the government's ability to successfully implement the measures. So whichever statistic you looked at, it was a very clear picture coming from the British public that they were not in favour of these measures working so successfully. And in fact, 59% said there should be travel corridors of some kind, and they were supportive of those. And as we know, that's what the government later introduced. So the facts spoke for themselves. When you looked at the detail of what the British public was saying, they wanted alternatives to quarantine, and they felt that quarantine would be economically damaging. So the Quash Quarantine group sent a second letter to the Home Secretary outlining the results of the poll and why quarantine measures were not going to work. So then during the campaign, as the campaign went on, we received private assurances from senior government sources that in fact, around the 29th of June, quarantine measures would change in some way. We believed those sources. And as the end of June came, there was a late Friday night press release from the government around 10 o'clock on the Friday night, the 26th of June, saying that they were going to relax the blanket quarantine measures and in fact introduce some form of traffic light system or green, amber, red countries. So consumers could tell, they thought at the time, which countries would be the ones to visit. So it was very encouraging. It was clear that the Quash Quarantine campaign had certainly made an impact and forced the government to change. There was barely any support for these quarantine measures anywhere, both from the Conservative MPs, backbenchers, from other ministers who really weren't behind this measure, and also from the public who wanted alternatives. So that's what the government had to come up with. And the results became pretty clear. The government did review those quarantine measures at the end of June, as we've been calling for. We didn't want the quarantine to last. We wanted the abolition of blanket quarantine measures, which is what they did. They abolished those. They created these corridors, travel corridors, to over 50 low-risk nations. But there wasn't enough clarity on this from the government, because the Department for Transport issued one list and the Foreign Office issued another list showing countries which they felt were safe to travel. But when you put the two lists together, they weren't the same. Consumers have been confused by them. And in fact, our own research at the PC agency produced this map, which showed, and is still pretty well true today, that only 25 countries are actually open in both directions to English travelers. So if you're going from England to Greece, for example, from the 15th of July, you can travel there in both directions without having to quarantine, unless, of course, you're found to be positive. But it was only 25 countries that you could go to where you wouldn't have to actually quarantine for a number of days straight away on arrival. So out of the list, in fact, of 74 countries the government published, only 25, in effect, you could have gone to the following day for travel. So we wanted to produce a map to showcase that very clearly. And there's the map that was produced. And you can see that most of the countries which were safe to travel to or are safe to travel to are very close to the UK. There were 2 or 3 which are further away, perhaps 10-hour flights or more. But generally, most countries are within our neighbouring region of Europe, very, very close indeed. So that obviously helped to reduce the confusion from government, but undoubtedly that confusion is still there. The government, I think, has still not made it clear enough for consumers to understand where they can go without any quarantine issues, where they'll be safe. And undoubtedly the government needs to do more on that and run a campaign both in the UK and abroad to showcase where is safe to go to and why the UK is safe as well. So undoubtedly the campaign made an impact. We had plenty of coverage with over 300 features in newspapers across a 6-week period and online on broadcast and in print. And it made an impact. The government changed their measures. So let's look at some of the learnings from this and also look ahead to the future and how the sector is looking at the moment. So undoubtedly, we feel that travel needs a stronger lobbying voice, a more united voice. There are some very good lobbying groups out there, some very good organizations, of course, which are well known. But on this quarantine issue, either they didn't understand the magnitude of it at the time and the impact it was having, especially on tour operators and travel agents across the UK, or they, of course, were focused on other issues, such as the refunds issue, which dominated the start of coronavirus, many consumers not being able to get their money back as quickly as they would have liked for cancelled or postponed trips. And the refunds issue continues today, where many companies are watching their cash flow and trying to protect the money that they have in the hope that their customers will go on holiday with them at some point in the future. So I think the campaign and the whole Quash Quarantine issue actually demonstrated that government is used to working with certain lobby groups, but not, of course, necessarily with new groups who have a particular issue they want to fight. I think it showcased government has a very narrow view of what the travel industry is. It's not just airports, it's not just airlines, but actually a lot of the travel sector is also dominated by small travel agents, small tour operators, perhaps employing 5 people, 15 people, 20 people, turning over not much more than £1.5 or £2 million a year. And these businesses are really the backbone of the travel sector in the UK. So in the past, the lobbying efforts have been limited to groups such as ABTA, airline groups, airport groups, the Airport Operators Association, for example, and they've been also very successful. But on the quarantine issue, it needed a different voice. And I think the whole Quash Quarantine campaign has shown that in the future, we need to have a concerted effort, certainly when issues like this come up, that are very focused, very narrow, and perhaps only last a few weeks. It needs a united front as well. The travel sector traditionally has not united in a great way. You've had these different sectors within the travel sector itself, be it airlines, be it airports, be it travel agents. But actually, you need a cross-genre group, and that will be important in the future, I think. Let's look at some of the markets that are actually now starting to emerge or recover or not recover in some cases during the coronavirus epidemic. There is certainly some evidence that the over 60s are starting to book again, but there are many who are nervous about traveling, worried about a second wave. They're worried about the fact that there may be no vaccine and therefore there's a risk when they travel. And wherever they travel to, they want to know the healthcare system is in a strong position, that the health infrastructure will stand up if there is another second wave whilst they're away, or if the borders are closed in some way whilst they're away and they're stuck. So it's really important to boost confidence among the 60+ age group if we're to get them traveling en masse again as they were pre-March this year. The 18 to 30 market is key to driving recovery as well. 18 to 30-year-olds very strong on wanting to explore, get to know new places, understand where they can go and drive recovery. But clearly the 18 to 30 age group is also hardest hit in terms of losing jobs and potentially being unemployed and not having the money to travel. So that needs a focus. But those in work are going to be those that help drive the travel recovery. So Gen Z, Millennials, they certainly tend to be more risk tolerant, certainly culturally curious, exploring and want to know more and won't want to be stuck purely in the UK, although the UK market is obviously very important. Gen Zs in particular are highly nomadic. Travel is very important part of what they spend their disposable income on. And so those that have been able to save over the last few weeks whilst in lockdown, and many people have also been saving because they've not been going out to eat, going to the cinema, going to see friends, etc. That money has been very useful to save and will help them travel in the future. So yes, definitely some are cash strapped in the short term, but as a result, there's a target market there for the future. I think what travelers are looking for now are what Globetrotter magazine, who we worked on recently with our Future of Travel report, said are isolation vacations. After months in lockdown, those of us that do want to travel are craving isolation, we're craving space, we're wanting privacy. And actually, if you look at some of those in travel who've been doing well in recent weeks, it is villa specialists. They have been selling villas, especially in France, Greece, and Spain and Italy, very, very strongly. Those are the markets that have seen record sales days. They've seen sales well above this time last year. And that's because many people are searching to be in a bubble on their own. They're searching to be in their own space. They want to protect the atmosphere they're in. They want to know it's safe and clean, COVID-free, and that only their own bubble is there on holiday with them. So that is to the detriment of some larger hotels, for example. So nature experiences are proving very strong in terms of sales at the moment, outdoor activities whilst on holiday, and wellbeing retreats as well, especially isolated wellbeing retreats on islands, for example. They're in high demand and selling. So you can also expect coastal getaways, wilderness breaks, and exclusive hire to be doing very well. Again, those with disposable income who've saved over the last 3 or 4 months, especially multi-generational families, are starting to go away and book their own exclusive breaks on private islands or in areas where there are very few other buildings around them. In the domestic market, again, the strength has been in holiday cottages, holiday homes, rental homes. They have been filling up very quickly for staycations or staycations, as some are calling them, in the UK market. Very strong sales indeed across key markets such as Cornwall, Cotswolds, Dorset, Devon, Yorkshire. Very, very strong as some people opt to stay at home, not to travel beyond the UK shores. So is this the end of the city break? As more people choose to go to villas on the coast, for example, or go within the UK, but not to a city? Well, I think in the short term, cities are obviously facing a tough time. People are nervous about going on public transport in large built-up areas. They'd rather stay close to fresh air and countryside. So busy metropolitan areas across Europe that would thrive on over-tourism in the past, and which have suffered the most because they've been hotbeds for the virus, are those that are really going to suffer until coronavirus is treated, until there's a vaccine or it's ironed out. So I think city breaks are going to be off people's lists in the short term, not the medium to longer term. They will absolutely bounce back very strongly, but when a vaccine is found. So certainly for the next year, city breaks are not going to be as strong as they have been in the past. And indeed, it's an opportunity for city tourism authorities and city hotels to reset, ask themselves what they're for over the next year. How do they cope? How do they attract consumers and guests when in fact there's less yearning to be in the city? And so hotels in urban areas and in cities are going to have to rethink what they're offering, how many rooms they're offering, and how they're going to stand out and be different. Also, with the business travel market much smaller at the moment, how are they going to attract business travelers for the longer term? And crucially, there's going to be a very exciting acceleration of digital and digital technologies. So the traveler experience itself is going to undergo a massive shift, a really big change in how we travel. And you're already seeing that in terms of contactless travel. The fact that when we go to a hotel now, then in effect, you're not really going through a lobby. You will have checked in before you arrive at the hotel. Same at the airport. Tickets and paper tickets. This is now the opportunity to remove those completely and simply have an e-ticket which you've downloaded on your airline app. You're going to see contactless technology transform the travel experience over the next 3 years at a much faster pace than it was planned to before coronavirus. So you will see the end of the room key. You're going to see your phone open your room door much more, ordering through the app for breakfast in your room rather than going down and having a buffet of some kind, choosing the gym time that you want so that you book your slot between 10 and 11 for the gym, for example. All of these are now being developed and introduced already at hotels across the world. Overall, it's going to minimize, and what we're seeing is minimal human-to-human contact. So you're seeing the rise of technology and less human interaction to try and stop the disease, the virus spreading. And I think adopting digital technology is key to rebuilding businesses across the travel sector. If you're not looking at what technology you should be introducing as a business, you should be doing that now and asking yourself, which processes do I have in place that I can automate? Which are the processes that I can actually get an app for? How do I cut my costs in terms of those manual processes that traditionally might have taken longer and you needed somebody to do, and now you can have technology do it for you. Very, very important. So the new normal is very much about those new technologies and very much indeed about how you adapt your business and reset your business as well. So we've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to try and answer some of your questions which are coming in. Lots of questions coming in. First question is, what do you think is the future of tourism post-COVID? And when do you think people will start traveling to other countries for leisure? Well, one thing that I do know is that coronavirus is not going to kill off our human DNA to travel. We'll always want to explore. We'll always want to travel to see friends and family. And we'll always want to find new places to go to. We may reduce the amount of traveling we do and make it more high quality, find better quality trips, more adventurous trips to do. We might spend more when we go on those trips. And certainly a lot of tourism boards at the moment are looking at how they attract higher spending consumers in the future, but perhaps with less volume. So fewer tourists, but higher spending. So I think tourism's got a very strong opportunity in the next few years because of the ability to reset, to find itself, to work out what wasn't working pre-COVID, such as over-tourism, and to be more sustainable. And those are measures which a lot of companies are currently working on, as well as countries working on at the moment. When will people start traveling to other countries for leisure? I think that will, well, it is already happening. It's happening this summer with tourists already traveling again, especially across Europe. And if you look at China, domestic Chinese tourism is very strong indeed and bouncing back very quickly. So I think it's all about confidence. It's at what point do more people become more confident about traveling? And that's a job for governments to do, to encourage people to start going out and about more. And in fact, the UK government have started a campaign to get people to enjoy their summer safely. And the same is happening in other countries as well. So I'd like to think that will carry on and really, really help people to recover, both businesses and consumers. There's a question here. Shouldn't airline companies and travel operators design the travel policies and present these to the government rather than the government solely? It's a very good point. One of the problems during coronavirus, certainly in the UK, has been the seemingly lack of willingness to consult. There's been a lack of consultation. Interestingly, some people may have been spoken to, but not the whole travel sector. And that's been one of the problems, that measures have been introduced without that consultation. So I hope government's going to learn from that and in future consult with people before introducing things. One good example of that was last week when outdoor swimming pools were opened up with pretty well 48 hours notice, if that. And a lot of providers of outdoor pools or hotels with outdoor pools didn't have enough time or planning time to get those swimming pools open. Well, if government had consulted a lot earlier, then it would have been a lot easier for a lot of companies. So it's important for governments to consult. Yes, I think undoubtedly airline and travel companies are better at it. You've seen groups like the World Travel and Tourism Council, the WTTC, introduce what are called safe travels, their protocols, and those protocols have been widely distributed and used. So I think the private sector has played a major part in getting governments to understand what's needed, and then governments have been using those protocols to develop and design their own policies. But the consultation process has to get much better. It has to be more seamless than it was during coronavirus. And sadly, if we do have some form of second wave, I hope the government will learn from the first wave, lack of consultation, and be able to do things in a lot better way from a communications point of view. Next question, what is the future of cruising? I'm very optimistic about the future of cruising in the longer term. I think cruise lines are very adept at handling viruses on board, despite the issues early on in coronavirus when some ships were not able to handle coronavirus because it was a new virus. They were unsure what to do or how it was spreading. But generally, medical teams in cruise lines are very used to dealing with viruses or incidents on board. So I don't think the issue is about on board a cruise anymore, because testing can take place before everybody gets on. The issue is more around when hundreds of people or thousands of people in some cruise ship cases get off and go to a particular port or destination. And that is what governments are concerned about. It's actually what happens if lots of people get off and either take the virus back from the shore, back onto the ship, or take the virus somehow from the ship back to shore. And that's one of the things that's worrying governments. But cruise lines are working on it with governments. I'm confident it will be resolved well before the end of the year. And 2021 should be a very good year for the cruise sector. And judging by their bookings for 2021, the consumer thinks so too. I think those, we've got lots more questions, but I can answer more after the session. I'd like to thank you for your time, for the questions that you've brought in, and I hope you found the Travel Forward session very useful and that you're looking forward to the next speakers coming up later this morning. So thank you very much for joining me.